Hello crafty friends, welcome back to another video collaboration with the creative design team. I'm Julie, and today with Jema we are going to wrap up our week-long series on how to use one stamp 3 ways. Now this is how this stamp started, with this beautiful card, and I will show you how it all comes together, and then I will create 3 cards with this same stamp set. I'm using this beautiful thin cut for 2 of the cards. I'm using this stamp caption sentiment. Any sentiment will do, whatever you have in your stash. And of course, this beautiful flower right here. I'm going to use intense black ink for the coloring, of course, because we're going to do coloring for the first card. The second card, I'm going to use Oxide inks, and this one here, I can't wait to show you how it all turns out. And lastly, I'm going to use a little bit of embossing powder, and we are going to emboss this in white on black cardstock. So I can't wait to show you how all 3 cards come together. So hang tight, I'm going to clear my mat, and we're going to start with card number 1. Alright, so for card number 1, we're gonna go ahead and we are going to color it in with alcohol markers. So I did use intense black ink, and I'm going to use 3 markers for this coloring. So I'm starting with the pale pink, and I'm going in with the darkest shade right here, and I'm really following just the lines that the artist did on this flower. So very quickly here, I'm just dropping the darkest shade where those black lines are, and then I'm blending out with the mid. I'm leaving a lot of white at the top, and then I am just filling that flower in. That is it. It is a very easy flower to color in. And I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to use the pale pink in the shades just to give it a little bit more intensity. And I'll go over all of it again with a second coat, and that's all. So this flower is very, very easy to color. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to use the citrus green, and I'm using the mid-tone and the darkest shade. So I'm following again just those black lines for my shading, and I'm just adding those 2 colors. And then I'm going to do the little buds right here, and those I'm going to add a little bit more pink. And that's pretty much it for the coloring of this flower. Isn't that great? And I think that's really easy and really simple. Now this die is perfect. It's got this inside piece, so you can kind of use it to measure off your image, your stamped image. So you need that image to be like 1/4 of an inch bigger so that you can actually glue that frame on top. And I'm just going to use my paper trimmer here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave myself just about 1/8 of an inch all the way around, so that I have a surface to glue that nice postage frame that was cut out of ballerina cardstock on the dark side. So I find that that looks really, really nice. I'm just going to go ahead here, and I'm going to adhere that onto my card front, or I should say onto my stamped image. And I'm just going to pop that right into place. And I like using liquid glue, because this way, if I want to move that frame just a tiny little bit, I do have time to do that. So I'm going to add that piece to a black cardstock. And we're going to attach the entire thing to the card base. Now back to that centerpiece. That centerpiece is a perfect mat for the inside of your card. So I just went ahead and I cut myself a piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to mat that and add it inside my card. And then I'm going to stamp that really pretty sentiment at the bottom of the card front. Now I did go ahead here and I did place that in my stamp positioner right here, and I went over about 2 or 3 times because I wanted that black to be really nice and crisp. So I think that that looks pretty good. So we're just going to pop that right onto the card base. And then I'm going to add this centerpiece right here that was cut from the, I guess it's the negative part from the postage frame, and I think that makes a really nice matted piece for the inside of your card. So I'm going to pop that right into the center. And you know what? This card needed a little something. So I took out my clear shimmer brush and I'm just going to add shimmer all over the flower or all over the colored images on the front. And I think that that just gave it exactly what it needed. Just that beautiful shimmer. I hope you can see it here. And this card is pretty much done. So I'm pretty sure that this was how it was meant to be used. So let's look at a couple of different ways now. So for card number 2, I'm going to bring out some Distress Oxides and I'm going to stamp on black cardstock. Now, it takes a few times for it to show up, but I think it is completely worth it. So I've gone ahead here and I'm using little finger daubers just to add the colors where I want them. I started with the flowers with the picked raspberry, and then the leaves are done with the mowed lawn, and then all around I'm using peacock feathers. Now I'm going to spritz from a high up so you're not going to see it in the shot, but just a really faint mist. And then I'm going to use my stamp positioner here, my Misty, and this is key because you want to go back a few times. So this first pass is kind of underwhelming. Not much is going on. You can't really see it. So you're going to have to do this. I think I went over 3 times each colors. And as you ink them up, the color comes through the black cardstock and it is absolutely stunning. I really, really like the effect. Now you can see here that I've added the second coat of the picked raspberry. It's really, really starting to come across on that black cardstock. Now it's definitely a different look, but this was my original thought when I was trying to figure out which 3 ways I wanted to share with you today. So I think that you can really see it now, and let me just bring it close up. And isn't that gorgeous? So it's just regular Distress Oxide on black cardstock. So I'm going to set that aside and let it dry. But you know what? I have a lot of ink still on my stamp. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to use Distress paper on the smooth side. I'm going to give it a spritz. So I'm kind of holding my arm a little bit higher. It's definitely out of the shot. And I'm pumping all the way down. So if you do a half pump, you get kind of splatters. But if you pump all the way, you get a really nice fine mist. So here is what happens with the second impression. Now, isn't that nice on the white? Now, I'm not entirely sure if you would get the same look if you just stamped on regular white cardstock, but I did use here the Distress watercolor cardstock, and I found that this looked really, really good. So you get a 2-for-1 here with the Distress Oxide technique. I really like the way that that turned out. All right, so let's cut these down to size, and we are going to do the assembly quickly here. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm trimming off this stamp piece and I'm leaving myself about 1/8 of an inch all the way around on all sides, and you can just use the background. It's actually quite easy to trim it down, and I'm just going to trim that, and then we're going to add the beautiful postage frame right on top, and that will complete the assembly for these 2 cards. Now they're pretty similar to the first one, but it's just that beautiful Distress Oxide technique. I think that it looked really, really nice. So here I'm auditioning a few colors. So I pulled Lagoon on the light side, on the dark side, and then I reached over and I brought in some Glacier cardstock, and I kind of wanted something soft because I really wanted the showcase to be the actual stamping on the black cardstock. So I ended up picking Glacier cardstock on the dark sides. I'm showing you here there's a light and a dark, but whatever floats your boat. I think you can use whatever color you want at this point, but I ended up with this one. Alright, so we're going to assemble this quickly, very much like the first card. And the frame was cut out of a piece of scrap that I had in my stash, and it was like a wood grain. So I've got this piece here, and I'm thinking, well, that's not going to look really good on a white base. So I've gone ahead here and I've cut a black base card. And when I take the time to cut them out, I like to do top folding cards. And I really like that inside piece kind of carries from the front to the inside. I'm going to stamp this little image here right at the bottom. So the only thing missing now is to come up with a sentiment at the front of the card. And I know I kind of waited until the entire card was completed to stamp my sentiment, but it happens sometimes. So I do know that I need the thank you cards. Those are the ones that I probably use the most. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to stamp the word thank you on this white one, and then I'm going to do some little embossing on this one right here. Nothing like doing some white embossing on a completed card, but you know what, with the Misty I was pretty sure that I could get this done and I wasn't going to ruin my card. So you're going to add a little bit of powder here, and I think that the white is going to show up really nicely with this black background. And I really like the way that this card turned out. So that was the original, and then I ended up with 2 for the price of 1. So we always like that. So here is the completed card with the inside, with the black base. I do like that. And then my second card, and I did add a little bit of water. I did miss that just to extend the ink. And I'm pretty happy that I ended up with 2 cards with the same technique. So we're going to move along right to card number 3. And I must tell you that this is probably my favorite card out of all the 3 of them. And you'll see why when it all comes together. So first, we're just doing some plain old white embossing on black cardstock. Never underestimate simple cards because sometimes they just turn out really spectacular. So I'm going to heat set the white powder, and you see how it really shows up nicely. Like this stamp is really good for that. And the reason why I cut 2 is because I want to do a Slimline card. I have to say that these are probably my favorite cards to do lately, and I really do enjoy them. I know I find that, you know, some people don't like them because they're irregular, and I think that that's why I like them. So I'm going to go ahead here and I am going to cut right on that edge, so it's very easy to see. And then we know that the Slimline is 3.5, so I'm going to cut here at 3.5, and then I'm going to cut the top right here, right at the beginning where all of that nice pattern is at the top. So I'm going to cut that down, and then I did use my trimmer on the side to cut it at 4.25 because the length is 8.5. So I'm going to put these 2 right here on the card front. And because of that pattern, you know what? You probably could get away with just gluing these down and no one would really know. But I thought I would use a sentiment. And this one here, Deepest Sympathy, I know that sometimes it's not easy to make a sympathy card, but you have to remember that a card can mean so much to someone. And I thought, you know what, it might be a good idea to have a few of these cards on hand. And it is so classic that I just couldn't help myself. So I'm going to go ahead here and I am going to glue this down. So I'm just going to, now that I know that I'm going to actually add a sentiment right at the center point, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't line up. So I'm just going to pop that down, and then I thought, you know what, let's add a little something more to this card. So I'm going to glue this on a piece of silver foil, and it just gives it, again, that elegance that you need for these types of cards. I'm just going to make sure that everything is nice and straight, and then I'm going to pop that right on top. I'm not using any foam dots, I'm not using any glitter. I think the card and the sentiment speaks for themselves, and in this case here, it's super simple, but I think that it's really, really elegant. Now, if you're not a fan of the black, you know what? It looks just as nice in white. So I really hope that you've enjoyed these 3 ways to use this stamp set. I know that I did. Well, this wraps up an entire week of using one stamp 3 ways. I hope that you've picked up a few tricks and tips along the way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I will catch you in the next video. Have yourself a fantastic day.